Alright YouTube, this is how to change wheel bearings in a Raptor 700 in the front. And I'm going to do one side because the other side is basically the same thing. I went with aftermarket wheel bearings after the stock ones went, and they only lasted a few years. So I went and bought the OEM ones again, and when you buy them they come in pairs. And there's two different sizes for each side has two different sizes, and then they come with the seals. I'll show more on that when I open them up. I got my tools here. Breaker bar, extension, ratchet, 14 to get the bolts off, to get the wheel off, pliers to get the cotter key off, some punches for the bearings, and I'll be adding more tools when I get more into it because I can't think of them right now. I got a grease gun here to grease up the bearings when I put them in, hammer to tap it out, but I'll be explaining more of it. I know a lot of you like to skip through the videos to get to just what you want to see, and you want to see all this crap, so I will right off the bat show you the owner's manual, and it'll have the pages for doing the wheel bearings, and I'll hold the camera over it so you can pause and you can sit there and work on your own machine, and makes things easy. So if you don't want to watch all this crap. So I got this is one of the Yamaha Raptor 700 2007 shop manual, and this is handlebars. This goes into front wheel bearing here, and I'll hold it over as best I can, so if anyone wants to be able to pause the video and read it. I will show you this. This is how once you take the hubs off to remove the actual bearings in the hub, and they're kind of tricky. It takes some time and finesse, but eventually you can pop them right out. You don't normally have to replace this spacer right here where my finger's at, but I assume it's going to be in good condition, so I didn't buy another one. And basically what I have to do is take the front wheel off, which I'll leave it on the ground. I'll leave the tire on the ground, break the lugs, and then take this off, take this cotter key off. Once the tire's up and it's jacked up, take the cotter key off, take this nut off, slide the hub off, and then remove the bearings. And it's really not much to it. It just takes some time, and you probably need some like shop rags or something because your hands are going to get greasy. My tires are actually a little wobbly, which I'll jack it up and show you here. I just got a regular car jack. Some people have ATV jacks. I have one, but I didn't feel like it was necessary. You can see my wheel. It's got some flop to it. That's how you check them. You grab them, move them back and forth, and it's got some play. I'm running the Razor 2s. I don't know if you can see it. Razor 2 by Maxxis, and these are, I think, the bigger front tires than the stock ones. I also have the razors on the rear. This is the Getter edition, but from 2006 to I think it's 2008 or 9, the models don't change that much. But a quick overview: I added some hand guards, an hour meter, redid my seat. Didn't turn out the best, but it's like a motocross seat. It's the Attack Graphics seat, and I do get all my parts off of right here on my shirt, Rocky Mountain ATV MC. If you sign up on their website and make an account, you actually earn rewards points, which is really nice, and you save a lot of money if you shop a lot, so I would recommend them. But I'll get started here. So first step is to move the cap and take off the lugs. You want to make sure to keep your extension straight on there so you don't strip off the lug, because they can wear off, or corners wear down over time. So once you got them all broken, then you want to jack up quad. Doesn't need to go crazy, just get it off the ground here. Apologize for lighting, it's not the best, but some people do things differently. It's winter time right now, so I'm just killing some time making a video, because I always like to see the how people do things, and sometimes people don't know how to do things, so use YouTube to look it up, of course. So you got your nuts and washers off. Take the tire off. Then you do have guard, and I actually forgot to mention it, but you do need to remove the front brakes, and in order to remove the front brakes, you got to take off these two pins, slide them out, which releases the pads, and then after it's released, you can take the bolts out that hold the caliper on, and then the brakes should slide out, which I'll show that in the video. And then after the brakes are off, I will be taking off the pin here, then the nut, and then I will drive the hub off to get to my bearings. Alright, so I'm taking the brake caliper off, and I'm using a number 5 Allen wrench here. And I'm sorry it's kind of dirty. Didn't have much time to clean it. Normally my quad's pretty clean. But break these. These are the pins that hold in the brake pads. So you break those. Might have to spin the hub there in order to get at the pins there. Just for the video, I'm going to leave it so you can see them. And my pins are pretty dry, which means I'm probably going to want to clean all my brakes up and replace all those. And this kind of takes some time here. I'm no mechanic, but I don't like to let a dealership work on my stuff. You just kind of gotta wiggle the pins to get them out. These are pretty. I don't know if I've ever changed the pads on this. I got my pins out, throw them in the pile here, and I forgot to mention that the bolts for the tires are a 14 millimeter. So now that those are free, I'm going to rotate the tire or hub, and you can see that I got a bolt here and a bolt here which hold on the caliper, and I need to take those off. So I got a number 12 extension ratchet, and I would recommend when you take anything off to check the bolts and see if they have any Loctite on them. And if they do, when you put them back on, make sure you put some kind of Loctite, or machine's gonna fall apart on you on the trail, and nobody wants that. But I got my bolts here, and it looks like there was a bit of Loctite on there, so when I go to put it back together, I will add some Loctite. My Raptor will look a little different here because I do have these A-arm guards. They don't come with them stock. I forgot which brand they are. Someone's probably going to ask. So now that I got my bolts out, my pads are loose. As you can see, the calipers flopping around now, but the pads are still on a little bit. Kind of gotta wiggle them a little bit, get them off, and now I can check my brake pads. And pretty dirty, like I said, you need rags. These are pretty worn down. Probably should replace them, but I'm not too worried. I don't use the front brakes too much. But now that I got the pads off, got the caliper, I want to take the caliper here and tuck it up here. Keep it out of your way. Now I want to remove the cotter key, so you need some pliers. So you take the cotter key off. This one I might actually replace because it's kind of rusted up. Do a lot of water riding, mud riding. So now that I got the cotter key off, I can remove this, the hub nut. Alright, so now I have a 22mm socket with a breaker bar wrench. I wouldn't use a ratchet on it because you don't want to break your ratchet unless you don't have a breaker bar. But when you go to tighten this nut back on, it is actually 52 foot-pounds. So I would recommend using a torque wrench to tighten it back down to set the bearings so it's the right type. Take this off. Take the washer off. Slides right off. I was actually surprised it's still greased up from last time I changed it. This guard right here should be floppy. That's a stone guard. It's no big deal. I know some people probably take them off, but you can see the wear here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I could probably use new front brakes, but I don't really use them that much, so I'm not even really bothered. You can check your bearings. Mine are pretty grindy. Stick your finger in there and roll it. You can feel the difference. They should just be real smooth, and these are kind of grindy. I probably could have got another year or two out of them, but I don't like to have any breakdowns on the trail. I would rather do it now than later. Spend more time riding. Alright, so I've got a couple tools to pry out the seals. These are the new seals. I actually kind of got them dirty. But anyways, you got spacers in here. Take those out. Stick your screwdriver in here. And you want to actually just twist it all the way around. So your seal pops out. And then flip it over. Take your spacer. Pop that out. And stick your screwdriver in the other side. Again, gotta twist it and pry up the seal. It's gonna take some doing. You might tear up the old seals trying to remove them, so it's always a good idea to buy new ones. I don't know what this tool is used for, but I use a lot for prying out some stuff. Took a little wrecking bar. So, I got my old seals out. They're pretty dirty. They're not too bad. The insides aren't blown out or anything, but I am going to replace them since I have it apart. You are going to want to clean up all your spacers real good before you put them back in. This is the part that you kind of have to play with. And I don't know if you can see it on the video here, but you got your bearings. This is the bigger one. This is the smaller one. And then inside there's a cone spacer. It's like tapered. And that's where it gets tricky for getting out. So now I have to remove the bearings here. And you can't just drive them one way. As you can see in there, I'm trying to get some light in there to show you. There's a little lip, and you got to take the punch, put it on the lip, and rotate it around like this as you pound it out. And one side, the bearing will drop out this side, and then you flip it, and you do it from the other side. Right here is a diagram where you got your hammer, you got the bearing that you're going through right here, and you're actually sliding the punch through, and you're rotating it, and you're hammering out right here. You're getting on the edge of the bearing and hammering out. Okay? And this is the way that the manual says to do it, so that's the way I'm going to show you guys how to do it. If you got another cool way or an easier way, I'd love to know. So you got a bearing. You got a bearing here, and then in between you have this collar, which is this right here where my finger's at. It's like a cone shaped spacer, and you have to remove all those in order to put in all of the new bearings. So there's really not much to show here for pounding out the bearings. I mean, it's kind of hard to videotape or even see, but you gotta take your punch, put it inside. Take your punch, put it inside, and actually rotate the collar or spacer to the side, and you'll see the lip of the bearing. You gotta take your punch and put it on it. Probably might have to sharpen up your punch. Like I got some dull ones here. Sharpen up your punch and then put it on that edge and hammer it out. So I ran my punch here on a grinder because I need a sharp edge to stick in there and hook the edge of the bearing, because it is going to take some time. And then you just want to occasionally check and watch your bearing kind of slide out as you go. You want to stick it in and rotate it back and forth, and you'll feel it pop. Then you get on the lip, give it a whack, you rotate it, pop it to the side, slide it down, give it a whack, and just keep doing that repeatedly until your bearing starts coming out. It is going to take some work, but doesn't everything? Alright, so I didn't show this on the video, but I took heat right here. Took some heat. I heated up around here. Flipped it over. Took my punch. Put it in. And I started hammering out till it came flush. It's flush right here, all the way around. Now I need to set it up on something. Where my fingers are at, so when I go to punch it, the bearing has room to pop right out instead of flat on the table, or it won't come out. Alright, so what I did was I put it in the vise, and none of my studs were hitting anything, so they didn't damage the threads. And I started punching through, and my bearing dropped out. This right here, it's kind of hot. I kept adding a little bit of heat, and it makes it slide a lot easier. And this is the spacer I was talking about. That's the one you want to try and not scratch up, but as you can see, it's kind of rusty. So it was good that I took it out. And now what I have to do is take out this bearing right here. There's what the inside looks like. That's why you can't just drive it one way. You got to drive it out one way and then the other way. But now it's easy. So all I got to do is reach in there with my punch and punch this other bearing right out. And then I'm ready to install actually clean everything and make sure there's no bad edges, and then grease and reinstall all my new bearings. Alright, so I got out all the bearings, and as you can see, there's that sleeve in there on this side and this side. I got it cleaned up pretty good, and I'm going to show you here how it goes in. So you got your seal, you got your bushing, you got your big bearing for the big side, and then you got your I want to say it's a spacer or collar. And this actually slides onto the your axle here, and I'll show you. So we'll go over here, and when you put it back together, the shaft, and if you dent it up any bit from trying to get the bearings out, what you can do is, I kind of had trouble with it at first, it'll probably get stuck about there. You just take your hammer and you lightly tap around the edges real lightly until you can get it to fit. And then slide it on, make sure it's going to work, because you don't want to have the struggle after you already put it back into the hub with the bearings. You want to make sure it's going to work. So you come over here, and if you need to figure out the exact way it goes inside of the hub, you can bring it over here and set it up and make sure you align everything right. Alright, so I greased the inside of here, which you can tell it's greasy, and then I greased up the bearing nice. It's kind of slippery, but any excess will just slide right out. And I packed this full of grease. It didn't come full of grease, but as you can tell, it's got like a metal collar in here, and the aftermarket one had like a rubber one. I will see which one works better. I don't know. So what I do to set these, you try to get them even and then you slowly tap around the edge, and you want to make sure it's nice and square going in, so you don't bind it going in. So now that I have it in, it's nice and flush, and I will find a socket that fits over top of this, put it on top, and then actually hit the socket with the hammer to set the bearing all the way in. When your bearing is set all the way in, and you know it's all the way flush, you can add some more grease to it. I do a lot of water riding, so I always want plenty of grease. The only thing that will happen is if you get too much grease, it'll just come out when you compress it all in on the when you put it on the shaft, or when you put the seals on, and then you can just wipe off the excess. So the only thing you're wasting is grease. Then I'll take my seal and I'll fill that full of grease. And you want to be careful because there's a little spring inside of this seal, and you don't want to damage that spring because it helps it seal. So you got to be really careful when you're doing the reinstall of the bearings. So it's nice and greasy, you got grease everywhere. You want to put the open side down. Just push it with your fingers as far as you can. Till you get it started. And then you can use a mallet or hammer or whatever you're using to tap it in real slow and easy. And then I'm going to take my socket here and drive it down. I take the older stock spacer, insert it where it was before, and that's one side of the, that's the bigger side done, and this will be the inside. So I want the this big spacer to fit so it slides in this way, and if you don't get it right, you have to take this all back apart and spin this around if you don't put it in right the first time. So now I just grease up this. You need to take your smaller bearing and fill that with grease if it doesn't already have enough on it. Grease is just a preference. You could probably do it without it. It depends on what kind of riding you're doing. I do a lot of water riding. I go down south in the mountains, so I like to add lots of grease to everything. And slowly tap it in. Try and make sure it's even as you tap it, or it'll bind on you. That just slid right in for me, no big deal. Then I want to go back and then find another socket to fit around the bearing. Tap that down real nice and gentle so you don't put any kind of torque on the bearing or knock it out of round or anything, so works just right. Alright, now that my bearing is set, make sure you still got plenty of grease on there. Everything lines up right. And you can play with the spacer inside to see how tight it is, and you might want to tap it till it gets harder to move, or you'll have to compress that later, and it might be a big pain. I take my new seal again. Got to make sure it's clean before you put it in. Take your new seal. The depth looks like it's gonna fit. Fill it full of grease. So now that I got it coated with grease all the way around, got everything lubed up, slide my bearing in with my hands. This one slid right in nice. And then take your spacer that you took out before, grease it up a little bit, slide it in. Should be flush. And that's how you reinstall bearings. This side sets a little deeper. This side's pretty close to flush. And that's how to reinstall new bearings. Then you got your old bearings, and your new ones are in. Alright, so now that I'm ready to reinstall my hub with new wheel bearings, I set my torque wrench, just a cheap Harbor Freight. I didn't want to go too crazy on it. I might later, to 52 foot-pounds from what the manual says. And I slide it on here. Goes on real nice, spins. Alright, so now that everything's back together, I put the washer back in. You got your brake back on. You got your pads in. If you bought new ones, you put new ones in. You greased everything up. Use anti-seize on that. I use blue Loctite 242 on the bolts so they don't come back out. You want to install your little guard back on here. And install your wheel. Everything in this video also applies to the other side. So when you buy your wheel bearings, you'll buy them, depending on where you get them from. Where I got them, they were sold as two. So everything I bought, I only had to buy it once because it came with double for both sides. And everything applies to the other side. What I didn't show in the video was I added heat to the hub to expand it so I could get the bearings out. I didn't have enough hands, but that is recommended. Just don't add too much. Be very careful. And that is how to replace a wheel bearing on a Raptor 700. Hope you liked the video. Please subscribe. I will be doing more videos hopefully in the future, depending on how many likes I get on this one.